What's up, YouTube? Welcome back to another YouTube video. Today we have something that's been requested for a while, which is that we go back and actually do a Master Duel tier list. We haven't done one in a while, and I felt like with the release of Tenpai, that was a good time to actually talk about the position on some of these decks in the format, because some decks are good against Tenpai and some decks are not, and that's a big impact right now on how good a deck is in the format. Once again, as always with these, if your deck that you feel like should be mentioned or should be on here and is better than I think, feel free to leave a comment under the video and I'll try to respond to as many as I can on where I would put them on the list. The tiers: tier 0, absolute best deck in the format. Tier 1, very strong decks. Tier 2, just very solid. Tier 3, just all right, you know, you can play them if you really want to. Tier 4, kind of meh, like decks that I personally wouldn't recommend unless you really want to, but they're not the greatest. In order to set the tone straight, this is where I'm gonna rank Tenpai. I created the tier 0 category, even though I don't think I'm gonna put any deck into it, but just to showcase that I don't feel like Tenpai is that crazy strong. I don't want to act like or pretend like it's not a very strong deck. It is very, very strong. It is very good. It's also very popular right now, but it is not the absolute best deck in the game by a mile. And if you play anything else, you're basically at a disadvantage. That is not true. There are very good counters to Tenpai. The Tenpai mirror match is kind of whack, right? Like when you're playing the ladder, I feel like it'd be frustrating to play Tenpai mirrors because 50% of the time they're just going to send you first. And there's a couple of decks on this list that really benefit from the fact that Tenpai is so popular, because you can just play some of these decks that just farm Tenpai, and people do play those, right? There's been an increased usage rate in something like Labrynth, for example. Just to address some of the critique points that people have about Tenpai, yes, the deck is rather simple to play, although there are some game states that do actually require a decent bit of thinking, but the majority of the skill when it comes to Tenpai is the player that's playing against Tenpai. Not Tenpai itself, but it's mostly like, how do you use your interactions against Tenpai the best, and so on and so forth. So I actually do think Tenpai is overall fine for the game. I haven't had any issues with it. Like, sometimes you lose to it because they have all the right answers, but that can technically happen with a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh decks, so I think Tenpai is fine. I have mixed feelings about Tearlaments because on the one hand, it's a deck that can still pop off like crazy even without Pearl or Rhino. I don't think right now is the perfect time for playing it because some of the most popular decks in the game are running Shifter. That is Tenpai, and that is also Ritual Beast. It just feels weird to me. I don't know if you agree with this or not, but I feel like it barely feels like a Tearlament deck anymore. It's just like a graveyard good stuff 60 card grass pile. Some people even put cards like Gen and Ken with Thrust in it, and that sort of deck, like, it's scary to go against, but it also depends on, like, do you get Shifter, do you get Bestialed or whatever. For me personally, I'd probably put it here, but I do think I'm not doing it justice because I'm just not a huge fan of it anymore, but I think it's probably somewhere in the tier 2. It's still viable. Let's just get it out of the way, right? The patchy is on the thing. Let's talk about stun. I feel like, and I hate to say it, both runic stun and regular stun are surprisingly underrepresented right now. Technically, both runic stun and regular stun are really annoying for Tenpai to go up against. You're always sending that deck first, and that deck is super scary when it goes first. I guess on the contrary, the Tenpai decks have a lot of outs to the stun board. Duster, Lightning Storm, even Dark Hole and all that kind of stuff. Maybe that's the problem. Overall, I think this deck is better than its representation at the moment, but still not great. This one I'm actually going to leave in tier 3, but it's definitely an alright deck, especially if you play against a bunch of Tenpais and you build your deck accordingly. The only problem is, in order to really feel safe against Tenpai, you do need to open that Solemn Judgment. I understand why people aren't really playing it. I mean, thank God people aren't playing it as much at the moment, but it's still scary, I feel like. Sky Striker, on the other hand, was a deck that after Ryan Yu's performance in the TCG with it, I played with it, and I hate to break it to you, but this deck is not great because it's basically Tenpai, but in a lot worse, to the point where even if you play against Tenpai and you win the coin flip, your odds of actually OTKing them on the first turn are so much lower than theirs, right? Like, basically, if they send you first, you always die, but if you send them first, they only sometimes die, but in the majority of the time they can still kill you on the next turn. I don't like this deck right now, especially when there is another go second deck in the meta. You can climb with it though. I want to say that even the decks that I put into tier 4, if you take the time to learn them, master them, find a good list for them, and just stick to it, you should be able to climb with almost all of the decks on this list, or even all of the decks. Branded, I think another instance of a deck that is, I think, slightly underrepresented. I don't see many people run Branded at the moment. Maybe it's because they lost their Jaugen toy, but I think Branded is still good, especially once Branded opening is going to go to 2. I think Branded is one of those decks that has a solid Tenpai matchup if you get to set up. I think it's a solid tier 2 deck. Not my favorite deck in the meta, but very much playable, and I'm a little surprised that I'm seeing it very, very rarely. Now, I'm going to be biased on this one, and everyone who's watching my streams regularly knows this. I play a lot of Centurion these days. I like this deck a lot. I think it's very fun. I like that it has an okay Tenpai matchup all around because you can play a lot of non-engine. So what I've been doing is just I've been playing a lot of these hand traps that are good against Tenpai, like Ghost Ogres, Crows, even Bell has been in my list. Against a lot of these 60 card combo piles and all that kind of stuff. You do have Bestials in your deck, which I'm a big fan of as well. The regained grind games. I love Centurion. For me personally, I feel like I would put it here. To do the whole thing a little bit more justice, I'm going to put it at the very top of tier 2. I think it is the best tier 2 deck. I don't see a reason to play Dragon Link unless you really like it. It is fun, but it's not bad. You can do okay with Dragon Link. I think the biggest downside is that like your end board is not safe from Tenpai. Tenpai plays a lot of hand traps as well that hurt your deck. Bestials are not great into Tenpai. In times where Branded and Tier were more popular, this deck could have been completely fine right now, but right now it's just like, all right, you're not really making a good meta call with it. It's just playable. Fire King is still very, very strong. I almost feel like criminally underplayed. I faced this deck almost never, even though the changes they made to this deck were very, very small. This deck is still very good. I don't really know why it's so rare. Maybe it's just like the meta players are gravitating more towards Tenpai right now. This is true for both Fire King and Yubel. Both of these decks are still very powerful and very playable. They just have fallen out of favor because everyone who's trying to play a tier 1 deck is gravitating towards Tenpai, which I do understand because if I had to rank them among each other, I do think that Tenpai is a stronger deck than the other two. I think they should be more popular than what they are right now because I play against them very rarely. Maybe another issue is just like they do lose to Shifter, both of them, but they're both still very, very powerful. Floowandereze, not particularly a fan of this deck, of course. It's between all right and meh for me. Immune to Shifter is a bonus. At the same time, some of the other decks are also immune to your own Shifter, which is a problem. I'll give it the benefit of the doubt and put it to the bottom of tier 3. I don't think it's as bad as some of the stuff that's going to end up in tier 4. I've decided to include all of the new themes from the new pack. That includes Goblin Bikers. I've tried Goblin Bikers actually in a little show match against Jesse. The deck is underwhelming. The issue with this deck is not its consistency. There's a lot of rank 3 support out there, and you also have room for non-engine. The problem is that your end board just doesn't hold up. Even if you get the combo and you have 1 or 2 hand traps behind it, a lot of these meta decks will cook you through that. I think that is a problem that this deck has, which means I'm gonna throw it into meh. I am not convinced by the Goblin Bikers, unfortunately. I don't even know why I kept this in here, because what does Horus even mean? Is this Horus Stun? Is this Horus Tearlaments? Because we have talked about that earlier. Horus Naturia, maybe? Maybe that's also tier 4. Maybe it's tier 3. Definitely not tier 2. A Horus deck with Naturia cards and some floodgates can't be that bad. Especially if Tenpai lets you go first and you play cards like there can be only one. It goes here. Infernoids are also, out of the new pack, one of the more underwhelming archetypes. The thing is, at the end of the day, it is still a deck that if you want to go the route, you can play 60 cards with Grass and Thrust, and you can play Snake Eye cards in it for Diabell Star to go into like Decatron and have some guaranteed ways to combo that don't require you to mill. Monster Gate is at 3 in Master Duel. I feel like even though this deck is underwhelming and there's other decks that are better, there's a limit to how bad a deck like that can be, right? Like that sort of deck can always win games when it goes first or sacks when it goes second. So like here, maybe better than Goblin Biker in my opinion, but haven't played it enough to say exactly if I think it's solid or just kind of all right. Labrynth is one of the decks that I was talking about earlier that got a huge boost because of Tenpai's popularity, because Labrynth is historically one of the decks that is the best when it gets to go first. And depending on your list, you can build a Labrynth deck that's actually very, very solid into Tenpai. You can play the more combo heavy variant, like the Furniture Labrynth version, or you can just play a Trap Lab version with like Solemn Judgment and Lord of the Heavenly Prison to just make sure you don't get blown out by Duster, or like this Judgment can even stop Reboot. You're gonna farm all the Tenpais, which is like half of your games. In other matchups, if you win the coin toss, it's still fine. Even if other matchups are very dependent on the coin flip. Like if you lose the coin flip to Yubel or Fire King, you're not gonna have a great time. Or Centurion, right? Those matchups are hard going second, but they're fine going first. As long as you beat 80-90% of the Tenpais, which with the right build, you can achieve that, and then have other matchups be kind of coin flippy, that's fine. Overall positive win rate. Deck, I think, goes Here, very solid. I like it. You have no idea how much it pains me to say it, but this deck is not awful right now. Literally because of the reasons that I hate it. It's a crazy combo deck that plays through a lot of hand traps very well, except for Shifter. Shifter is popular, but the thing is Mathmech is so scary when it goes first. And Tenpai always sends you first. So as long as Tenpai doesn't draw the Shifter or they play a one of Magnamut, that one is also really powerful against you. If they don't draw one of those 3 cards, you probably cook Tenpai. Not every single time, you know, sometimes they have the right hand trap, sometimes they have the maxi, you can't out it. Those kind of things always matter. I think that's what's stopping it from being like a really good deck, but I am gonna rate it higher than I have previously. I think for me, this deck goes somewhere here, like between branded and tier. I don't think this deck is bad. You won't see me really playing it unless the people in my chat force me to, but it's pretty good. Paleozoic. As much as I love this deck is basically at the moment a Tenpai farming simulator, right? You're gonna have trouble in other matchups. You might think like, okay, that means it's the same as Labrynth. The problem is you also lose to good Labrynth players. Labrynth is decently popular, I know. Look, for me personally, I would play this deck before I play Mathmech or tier or branded even. More justified is probably here, because the thing is this deck doesn't even have that much counterplay to like Lightning Storm and Duster, so sometimes you still get blown out by a Tenpai player. It's definitely playable, but it's not tier 2, I don't think. I don't even know why I included plants. This is going to be awkward because this is the moment where I gotta talk about this deck. It's in a similar spot as Mathmech. Unironically, the same thing is true for this deck that is true for Mathmech. Like all of the things. If this deck goes first, it wins. Unless it gets shifted. Can happen. But if they don't have that, then your deck starts cooking, right? Like that deck is nasty when it gets to go first. So like your Tenpai matchup with these 2 decks, Mathmech and plants, is crazy because they always get to go first, right? You don't win 100% because sometimes you get hand trapped and all that kind of stuff, but it's good. The difference I think between the 2 is plants is a little weaker to the mainstream hand traps like Imperm and Veiler, whereas Mathmech is a little weaker to the not as popular hand traps like Crow, Ogre, and Bestials. And I think that's why Mathmech is slightly better. I had a folder with all the images from previous Master Duel tier lists and I was like, should I remove Purrely or not? I'm like, nah, it's still good enough to be mentioned. It's probably better than some of these decks on here, to be honest. Here's the weird thing about Purrely. Everyone knows Purrely isn't bad, yet I don't even remember the last time I played Purrely, like against Purrely. No one really plays this deck, which makes it really hard for me to judge. It does struggle with some of these previously mentioned hand traps. Ghost Ogre, Bro, those are getting more popular. Some of the hand traps that Purrely was historically very good against are not being played at the moment, like Nibiru. So the hand trap situation isn't ideal for Purrely. I think I'm still gonna give it a high tier 3. If you really want to play it, I think you can. You know, you're gonna go first against Tenpai. You set up an unaffected Noir. You're good. The thing is, they do play a lot of hand traps to try and stop you. But if you ever play against the board breakers, right, those don't really matter to you. I mean, Lightning Storm and Duster hitting your back row matters, but as long as you can get to the Noir, you're fine. I knew Ritual Beast was good because of how well it's been performing in the TCG recently. But it was one of those decks that I thought when it comes to Master Duel, it was just gonna like not be as popular because of its weaknesses to Maxi. In my head, I kind of compared it to the Unchained situation that we had a while ago. Right? When Unchained came out in Master Duel, it was previously the best deck in the TCG, but it didn't really carry over. It didn't really perform in Master Duel because under Max C, it was a tough environment for it. Ritual Beast has surprised me. I thought it was going to be the same, but it's better somehow. And I can't really pinpoint why that is. Maybe it's because you get to go first more often because Tenpai is in the mix. Maybe it's because you have Shifter. Part of me also thinks it's definitely due to Protoss. Protoss is crazy. You also have access to Baguska, which is something that Unchained didn't have, right? If you get Maxied, Baguska pass can be enough. Also very complicated to play against, right? Like if someone hasn't taken the time to learn how to play Ritual Beast, they also won't know how to play against it perfectly, right? People do misplay with and against the deck a lot. I'm not excluding myself from that. I've been learning Ritual Beast on stream. It's very rewarding if you actually get there, but it's a long journey and I'm not even halfway through learning some of these combos and some of these lines and all that kind of stuff. And then you have to adapt them when you get hand trapped in different spots or you play into boards and all that kind of stuff. matchup. It's very tough. All those things being said, I'm pretty sure Ritual Beast is going to establish itself as, depending on who pilots it, either a very high tier 2 deck, but right now I'm actually more inclined to put it into tier 1. If you master this deck, you're going to have a very good time right now, right? Because the Tenpai matchup is very reasonable. You don't get blown out by Shifter. They always send you first. A lot of these other hand traps that we talked about previously don't do much against Ritual Beast. Your biggest enemies with Ritual Beast are the timer, and sometimes it bricks. But good deck, very good deck. Okay, Runick Fountain here stands for just Runick Combo decks. This could be Runick Naturia, which is still solid. It could be Runick Bestial. Those decks, I think, are viable. As much as I would love to put them into tier 2, I don't think they are quite that. Oh yeah, Runick Ice Barrier is another one that you can play. I've been messing around with Runick Goatee a little bit. That deck's fun. I think the best one is still Runick Naturia. If your opponent sends you first and you know it's Tenpai, you can set up Naturia Beast, and that's pretty good. The advantage of Runick combo decks over other combo decks is that you have access to ways to stop Lightning Storm and Duster in Hugin. Obviously, these decks suck into Shifter, all of them, and they are weaker combo decks than Yubel and Fire King for sure. They don't have as much non-engine room as decks like Centurion. For me, it's like here. I like it. I play it occasionally, but I don't think it's a particularly good meta call or anything like that. It's just all right. Swordsoul is the evergreen on these tier lists. I always include it, and I always say the same thing. Deck is too fair right now. You can full combo against Tenpai and they still will kill you with like 2 or 3 cards. I actually added Thunder Dragon to this because my first stream after Tenpai release, I played some Tenpai and I lost to a Thunder Dragon deck, but that was the only one I've played against since. Maybe it's just on no one's radar. Colossus is really good against Tenpai. No Pydra, no Kaiman, no Sangan summoning search that you have to worry about. So literally like deal with their normal summon and you're chilling. I'm gassing it up. It's not tier 1 or tier 2. I think it's tier 3, but that is still, I feel like, way better than people give it credit for. Like I would throw it somewhere here. No one really plays this deck, so I don't know how much it matters. I guess this is your wake-up call. If you're a huge Thunder Dragon fan, I think now is your time where you can actually play it because some of the meta decks actually get slaughtered by it. Kashtira, surprisingly, is nowhere to be found. Probably because it's very bricky these days. That alone is a reason for me to not play the deck, right? If you're trying to play a Shifter deck, why are you not playing Tenpai or Ritual Beast? But only because I don't see a reason to play it over some other decks does not mean it's terrible. Like, I do think there is a difference between playing Swordsoul and playing Kashtira. I think Kashtira is slightly more viable. I think I'm just going to place it next to Floowandereze. Rescue Ace is one of those decks that's typically being played because it's good into Max C. It can even be okay into Shifter depending on what kind of hand you draw. My problem is the amount of times that you will just do your full setup and they activate Lightning Storm or Feather Duster, and you will simply not have enough to withstand the Tenpai onslaught. I don't think this deck is good into Tenpai. That's the thing. All of these decks in tier 1 and tier 2, they are at least all right into Tenpai because they always go first and they have good combos against it or good non-engine against it and so on and so forth. Rescue Ace, I don't think makes it into tier 2 because it would be the only deck in both of those categories that would actually have a bad matchup against Tenpai. I think the deck is playable. Right now, I don't see a reason. Even if they don't have Duster, right? They can activate Sangan Summoning, which you can't interact with. Now everything is unaffected and they can just go one normal summon into Black Rose and all your stuff is gone, right? It's very difficult for Rescue Ace to navigate that matchup. It's not a great spot to be in when your worst matchup is the most played deck in the format. Spright decks in general are going to get a little bit of a bump with Spright Starter to 3, which made me want to talk about it for a moment. There's different versions of Spright, right? Fry Brigade Spright is probably even more relevant right now than Pure Spright, because Pure Spright, even with 3 starters, like 1 Nimble Beaver, 1 Swap Frog, no Totally Awesome, 2 Blue, 2 Jet, it's rough. They are not tier 4 though. They are even better than some of these decks that I put into tier 3. I'll chuck Spright like somewhere here. It can still make very powerful boards going first. It can make very powerful boards under Shifter. Gets to always go first against Tenpai and have like Carrot or Lightning Storm. Even if they have the field spell, you can still use red on the Chandra in their hand and so on and so forth. It's all right. We're gonna round it off with Voiceless Voice. And I think Voiceless Voice, for me personally, is also a little bit underrepresented. People seem to have a very, very low opinion on Voiceless Voice. The thing is, there is times times where this deck plays through 3 hand traps. Then there's times where you can't even handle 1. Then there's times where you can't even play at all. I think Voiceless Voice is at its best when your opponent plays hand traps and you can manage to play through 1 or 2 of them. And then they have like 4 cards left. You still have set up for Skull Guardian and the trap card and maybe your own hand trap. And then you start pairing it up against them really nicely and grind against them very nicely. If you're playing against Tenpai and they don't use up a single one of their cards, they just play board breakers and they have like Lightning Storm to force your Skull Guardian and then they have like Droplet, then you're gonna die in an instant. But what I'm seeing at the moment is most people in Tenpai are playing hand traps. And against that one, I think Voiceless is okay because the deck is actually quite good. Not every time, but on average, you can play through 1 or 2 hand traps. You will still get your setup. Voiceless goes here for me. If you want to play a sort of mid-range concept that can end on an Omni Negate and play non-engine and all that kind of stuff, I would always personally prefer Centurion. I think Centurion is a better version of Voiceless essentially in that sense. But still, Voiceless Voice is a good deck. I think people are underestimating it and it's also underrepresented a little bit at the moment. I mean, to be honest, a lot of decks are underrepresented at the moment because everyone is playing Tenpai, I feel like. I do agree, Tenpai is very strong. I mean, I put it up here, right? I put it as the highest deck on this list because it is kind of like the hot thing right now in Master Duel. It is very powerful, but I don't think the gap between Tenpai and the rest of the format, maybe it's not even existent. There's some decks that I think are on par with it, especially if you don't want to play Tenpai. You definitely don't have to. I barely see any Fire Kings. I barely see any Ritual Beasts. I barely see any Yubels. I don't see many Centurions. It's just so much Tenpai, when in the reality these other decks are all completely fine and playable, and some of them even have positive Tenpai matchups. So this is my overview, I guess, on some of the more popular decks in Master Duel right now. Like I said, if there is an unpopular deck or a certain deck that you think I should have mentioned, feel free to drop it in the comments of the YouTube video. I'll try to let you guys know what I think of those decks and their position in the format. Also, let me know what you feel like the format is like at the moment. Like, do you like it? I personally think it's enjoyable for the most part. I mean, some Tenpai games are a little cringe, but overall, I'm happy because I go into my deck editor, I see a lot of decks that I can potentially play and climb with and have fun with, and my win rate against Tenpai is actually not too bad with most of those. Hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know what you think in the comments down below, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye bye. Peace.